Assalamu alaikum, I'm Mike Still, and today I had the pleasure of being joined by Abdullah. He goes by Muslim Bitcoiner online and on Twitter, and as the name suggests, he looks at Bitcoin through the lens of Islam and from an Islamic perspective. We talked about loads of topics, like we said, is Bitcoin halal? Is the fiat debt-based monetary system haram? We talked about Bitcoin as an ethical monetary network. We talked about how Bitcoin might change the world in the future and the change it might bring about, and how we're both really optimistic actually about the future with Bitcoin as that base layer money. So I hope you get something from it. Do use the chapters, because we talked about so many different topics. So I hope you use the chapters to kind of skip to the bits that you want to listen to. If you want to listen to it all, great. But if not, just click to the timings of the segment you'd like to hear. One more thing, my t-shirt, Bitcoin Psychopath, that's me, I'm the Bitcoin Psycho. If you're wondering why I'm wearing this, it kind of goes back, it's a bit of a joke. One of my subscribers a couple of years ago commented on my video saying, oh, you're just a Bitcoin psycho, you know, why are you making these videos? And so it's kind of stuck and it's a bit of a joke now, and people comment, yeah, Bitcoin psycho. So that explains the shirt. And without further ado, please enjoy this wide-ranging conversation, which everyone likes to say these days, but this really was quite wide-ranging. We could have gone for much longer. Conversation between myself and Abdullah about Bitcoin. Thank you, Abdullah, for taking the time, and I hope you all enjoy listening to it. This has been a topic which, you know, given my channel, I don't know how much of my videos you've seen, but I started out on this journey of kind of learning Arabic and then teaching Arabic and then making travel videos. And ever since I started posting about Bitcoin, I've lost about 30,000 subscribers. My most... Nobody watches my Bitcoin street interviews out of my subscribers because it just doesn't match. And the number one rule with YouTube is stick to a topic and run with it. So my most popular video actually out of the Bitcoin videos is the little street interview I did with a Muslim guy who I bumped into in Birmingham, UK. And, we started getting on the topic of, is Bitcoin halal? Is it haram? You know, what do you think about that? And, I just wanted to get his kind of gut feeling, really. And so that, out of all of my Bitcoin street interviews, was the most popular and remains to be the most popular Bitcoin street interview because of my audience. So I've got a big audience, or a big part of my audience is in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Gulf regions, Jordan as well, and Oman. So I thought that it would be great to have you on here just to kind of discuss that topic. So yeah, just to give that little preamble there. But yeah, I'm curious, I thought you could give a little introduction about yourself, a little bit about you, and then how you kind of came across Bitcoin, and a little bit about your Bitcoin story, because I think that's always interesting as well.
Yeah, for sure. First of all, thank you for having me on. I have actually watched some of your videos, and I think it's really, you're quite brave in putting yourself out there in the public and asking people directly about Bitcoin, because it can be quite an emotional topic. So I commend you for that. So I guess just to introduce myself, my name is Abdullah. I have started the Muslim Bitcoin Twitter account. So, originally, my story, as I've talked about before on my podcast and other platforms, is that, I started out, I first heard about Bitcoin from my older brother back all the way in like 2013. So my older brother was the one that was like, he was like I remember him like looking at charts and stuff on his laptop, and I was like, what are you doing with this Bitcoin thing? So like, he didn't really quite get it, because back in 2013, there wasn't really a lot of material to kind of understand like what Bitcoin is or what its implications are as a money, especially. So like, after some time, like in 2016, he tried to, he set me up with a wallet. He sent me some Bitcoin. I didn't really think too much of it. And it wasn't until 2019 when he was like, all right, I'm going to send you the Bitcoin Standard, and you're going to read it, and you're not going to say no. So he sent me the book. I read the Bitcoin Standard, and that's, I think, like when the light bulb kind of started to go off. I was like thinking, okay, there's a lot to this Bitcoin thing, and especially I really like the way Saifuddin talks about Bitcoin from a history of money perspective, because I think that really kind of helps you get the full picture. And so after that, I was consuming podcasts. I kind of started going down the rabbit hole. I was reading other books and stuff. And then one podcast that I listened to is the Saifuddin's podcast with this Islamic banker guy. His name is Hadis Irfan. I'm sure you've probably seen me posted or heard of it or whatever, because I like to spam that podcast everywhere. But when I listened to that, that's kind of like when I started to kind of understand, wait a minute, this Bitcoin thing isn't just for me to like, secure my wealth. Like this is an actual like global money, and there's also like a really strong halal case for it, especially when you compare it to compared to fiat, and we could talk about fiat as well later. But I started listening to that, and it made me kind of like realize, wait a minute, there's a really solid case for Muslims to actually adopt this technology. And so I started consuming other content and stuff, and then my brother was like, hey, you should make a Twitter account and follow all these people. You can actually follow Saifuddin and people on Twitter. So I made a Twitter account, and I was like, I don't know what Twitter account to make. So I just put Muslim Bitcoin. I didn't really think anything of it, and I got like a stupid Wojak meme or whatever, and put laser eyes on it. And then next thing I know, I'm on Twitter. I'm interacting with people, and I was like, man, there's really not a lot of content out there that talks about the Islamic case for Bitcoin. So I started writing some essays on my Medium page, and then I submitted an article to Bitcoin Magazine. And just like from there, this Twitter account that I started it's kind of a part-time job trying to keep up with things. I get a lot of DMs from Muslims asking about Bitcoin and how to buy it and wanting to learn more about it. So that's been really great. And lately, just to kind of wrap up the introduction, my brother and I have started a nonprofit called Bitcoin Mejlis. So it's kind of like an educational based nonprofit where we try to educate Muslims about the halal case for Bitcoin. So we try to do it from a Bitcoin only perspective, because what we found is that a lot of these, Islamic finance platforms may be open to Bitcoin, but they do it from a crypto perspective, and they completely miss the point of Bitcoin. Especially it's as we'll get into, as I like to call it, it's anti-Riba property, or it's anti-usury property. And so we just started this not too long ago, so we're just kind of like running this, and we're running Twitter Spaces. We have a website with educational content, so we're just kind of getting this started. And I'm really excited to be kind of a part of that Bitcoin community where we're trying to educate more people about it.
Amazing. Yeah, no, it's funny. So actually, it's kind of funny how your older brother was the kind of the OG, and then you yourself became now the Muslim Bitcoiner. Could have been him, right? all this time.
Yeah. He doesn't really like to be on the spotlight or anything. So he was really impressed with like how quickly I got up to speed, because I was like, all right, give me more books for me to read, give me more podcasts. So he was just sending me stuff, and so now we're just I had to convince him of like, hey, we need to do something. We need to like get some kind of platform or something where we're telling other Muslims about this. And that's kind of like how we were like, all right, let's start this Bitcoin Mejlis initiative and see if we can get more Muslims to be orange pilled.
Yeah, no, sounds good. Yeah, I mean, like back in 2013, there really wasn't much much material to get hold of. Like you were kind of, I guess, I wasn't around in the Bitcoin space then, not even close, unfortunately. But I imagine it was just forums and like really obscure small groups of like cypherpunks type people. And fast forward 3 years to 2016 when you got more interested. Yeah, there was like some books written, and now it feels like there's so much. But the funny thing is I imagine, if we try and use our kind of forward thinking, I imagine that looking back on 2023 in a few years, they'll be like, wow, there wasn't really much going on. It was so early, right? And, we only had 5% adoption, like at a push, and it was still something that 99% of the people in the world didn't really understand. And the fact that you and your brother are kind of, continuing to further this educational endeavor to get more people educated and up to speed, because there is a lot to catch up on, is great. And it's extremely necessary because we're still so early, which is like my mantra, really. We're still so early. And I try and prove that by going out to the streets and saying, would you like some Bitcoin? And they go, no, I'm all right, thanks. And you're like, okay, we must be pretty early. And then another example of that is like my subscribers, like people who watch my language videos and stuff, like they come on and then someone comments, they say, you're a Bitcoin psycho, right? Bitcoin psychopath. Yeah. They say, Bitcoin is haram. And to be fair, I've had a couple of Bitcoin is haram comments, but then actually a lot of my other viewers, they kind of come in and they do defend and they say, hang on a minute, like, can you elaborate? And I don't think you're quite right to just say that. And there's interesting discussions which go on in the comment section of my videos, and no doubt there will be in the comment section below this one as well, about this topic. But you yourself, you're far more qualified to talk about this kind of stuff than I am. So what I really want to kind of address is that question, is like, whether or not Bitcoin is halal or haram. Like, it's not for anyone to definitively say, but it's a discussion, right? And it's a discussion. I want to hear from you kind of in this chat about where we are in that discussion, and then also, like, is it that Bitcoin is halal, or is it that the current system, the fiat debt-based system, is actually haram? And maybe you could just talk a little bit about those two things there.
Yeah, so first of all, I do want to say one limitation that my brother and I have is that, we're not like trained Islamic scholars or anything. So like, even though we are Muslim and, we've been studying the topic of money for a few years now, we don't really consider ourselves to be like an authority to declare something halal or haram. But, as Muslims, we do make the case for it, and we're not in the capacity of doing it, of like, issuing a fatwa or something, or a legal opinion. But, I do want to say about that comment about, so yes, there are a lot of Islamic scholars currently, even today, that still look at Bitcoin and they'll just call it haram. And they'll just, be very dismissive of it. They'll just say, it's like gambling. It's
like a Ponzi, because it's a Ponzi.
Yeah, exactly. They'll say like it's like a Ponzi scheme, or it's like volatile or something. One thing I like to talk about is how the current fiat system is more haram than it is halal, because of all the usury and interest that's involved with it. But I will say, just in the past year, I have noticed a lot of Islamic finance platforms that are currently talking about fiat. And it's weird because, like, I wasn't like paying attention to Islamic finance or anything like 5 or 10 years ago. But if you look back, there wasn't a lot of talk on the Islamic finance platforms talking about like fiat, or even going back to a gold standard. These conversations were kind of missing. But now, like, you see, Zoya Finance is one, it's an Islamic finance app that I use, that I also written an article for on their blog post. There's Practical Islamic Finance, Wahed Invest, which is a big Islamic finance company. Also, like, they also have like a podcast, and they're now starting to talk about how fiat is like inherently interest based. Yeah. So, the more acceptable thing for a Muslim to do, if they find out that, fiat is usury, and if they can make that connection, that's already amazing. Like, I'm not even mad if they could just get to that conclusion. But then they'll start advocating for a gold and silver standard, because that's kind of typically what is considered like safe in Muslim countries. So I will say, I feel like I'm getting the feeling that the tide is slowly turning, where I think especially a lot of the Muslims in the Islamic finance space may not be understanding why it's Bitcoin only as the solution, because I still think they're kind of involved in their blockchain, NFT, Web3 solution, or the halal blockchain, as I like to call it, which is the thing, unfortunately.
Yeah, but I've seen. Like, it was just facepalm when I saw you retweet that. I was like, it's just so sad. Like, you just can't eradicate scammers. It's just so difficult. And unfortunately, you start to, as you're in the space a while, you start to just think like they're gonna come, and you just have to like fight them, and it's a battle, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I try to be as nice as I can, but at the end of the day, they are scammers, and I just have to. There comes a point where I have to be blunt, but I do try to explain it though, and that's, I think, to be honest, I think that's one of the challenges that we're kind of finding out, is that we spend a lot more time talking to other people on Twitter and stuff, talking about why it's Bitcoin only, like explaining how fiat is interest based. Like, a lot of Muslims can kind of get that. They're like, okay, yes. Fiat is interest-based. Why? How come, let's go to a gold standard. Well, we can explain about the weakness of the gold standard, how it has, tendencies for centralization. And then, literally that's how fractional reserve banking came about, was because of this centralizing force that gold has, where people willingly gave up their gold to the goldsmith, and the goldsmith found out, oh, wait, I can actually lend out this gold. But then he thought, wait a minute, I can actually lend out notes that represent the gold. And that's kind of like how, over centuries, that's kind of how we got to the fiat standard we have today. So explaining gold is also difficult, but not as difficult as explaining as why it's Bitcoin only. And that's where we find a lot of our efforts are focused on, is like, because, you know, they'll say, oh, all right, fiat is inherently interest-based. Let's make our own blockchain, our own halal blockchain. So I have to kind of explain why it's Bitcoin only. You can't, you know, rediscover absolute mathematical scarcity. You know, all of these other cryptos have a leader that can influence the decision and the roadmap. And even a crypto having a roadmap doesn't really make it a money. Like, whenever you start kind of unraveling these defining features of all of these other cryptos, whether they be halal or not, you find out that they're more like securities rather than commodities, because they're always managed by a company or a founder with a changing monetary supply, changing issuance. So, you know, at the end of the day, the most ethical money that a Muslim could be involved in is Bitcoin, or, you know, also alternatively gold. But obviously, gold is a lot weaker than Bitcoin. So, yeah, that's kind of like where I'm seeing that conversation of, like, you know, there are some Muslims that are saying Bitcoin is haram. And of course, you know, we still have to try to like unravel that as well, because, you know, have to ask, okay, why do you say it's haram? And then they'll give some, you know, stupid reason about like how it's volatile. It's like, okay, well, silver, you know, I like to always bring a silver chart out. It's like, well, look at silver. It's literally like, you know, went like from $5 to $50 in the matter of a few years. That's volatile. So you just kind of have to like break down their arguments and try to like walk them through it. But like I said, I am seeing the tide churning to where Muslims are kind of waking up at least to the idea that fiat may not be the most halal money.
Yeah, that's really interesting that the discussion is bringing up this word. I mean, the word fiat, it's Latin, right? By decree, or sort of like, I think it means by decree. So it's like money which you are kind of forced to use legally. And I'd imagine, a tool I like to use is Google Trends. I imagine if you went on Google Trends and looked at the word fiat, I've not done this, it would probably not really be used much. And I expect there's a lot more talk about it now. There's like a bit of a awakening, if you like, but that word is entering kind of like the global consciousness, if you like. And that's the first step, I think, to understand. If you understand what fiat is, and if you understand the money that we use, and the fact that it's unlimited in supply, it's created by humans, you know, at the push of a button, and it's not scarce, it's very, very volatile, and it's, you know, in whether it's being created more of, or, you know, quantitative easing or quantitative tightening, whether they're making more or taking it out of the system. And that's the first step, I think, to understanding Bitcoin. I was going to ask your view on something, which is like the idea that when people think of Bitcoin, they also think of like trading. They think that, you know, if I say I'm a Bitcoiner, or like I talk about Bitcoin, they think that I'm kind of, a common question I get is, oh, have you made a lot of money on it? You're like, what do you mean have I made a lot of money? That's to you and me, that's like a silly question, because it's like, no, Bitcoin is money, right? Like, I buy a little bit each month, and that's pretty much it. Like, that's I'm not buying and selling and like looking at the chart. I mean, of course, I look at the charts to see where the price is at. Today, it's about 27,000 a coin, as we're recording on the 14th of May. But it's like, if you're trading it and speculating on it and kind of like, you know, trading with leverage, that's a very different thing to just doing what, like, you know, hodlers do, or like, you know, dollar cost averaging and kind of stacking Bitcoin and just using it as a savings account. So can you, like, I guess my question is, can you be a Bitcoiner, and can you be into Bitcoin in a, I guess, haram way, where you're kind of like addicted and you're gambling and you're speculating and you're betting more than you can afford to lose and you're being irresponsible? But then can you also do it in, you know, maybe a halal way, which is where you have a sensible savings account, you know, you save a little bit of your income each month. I'm not all in on Bitcoin, not even close, but I do try and buy a little bit every month just to kind of, you know, keep growing my stack. And so, you know, is that an important distinction to make, do you think?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, I like to look at money as a technology, like, and it's one of the most ingenious technologies that humanity's ever come up with. And, you know, with all technologies, you can either use it for good or you can use it for bad. And yes, like the way that you can use Bitcoin in a, I guess, kind of a haram way would be you just do it as a way to trade Bitcoin for more fiat. And that's the thing. Like, if you're just using that as a speculative asset to try to just get more fiat, I mean, you can't do that, and I don't want to try to make a definitively say that that is haram. But to me, that just doesn't seem like it's very ethical. And at the end of the day, it's just kind of useless, because all you're doing is just trying to get you're still in the fiat hamster wheel. You're still trying to get more fiat tokens so that you can buy other. It's very high time preference thinking. But the halal way that I like for other Muslims to use it is, like, first of all, before you even buy Bitcoin, like, read about it. It doesn't make sense to, like, buy something you don't know what it is that you're buying. Get some kind of sense that you are comfortable with, like, that you know what this Bitcoin thing is, and that you're comfortable with buying it. So first of all, read about it. Like, I have several copies of the Bitcoin Standard I like to give out to people, or even mail to people. Start, if you just want to get your feet wet, just buy some Bitcoin. Use it as like a savings account. You don't have to, like, look for merchants that are accepting Bitcoin or anything. Just, like, your very first step is just find an exchange, buy some Bitcoin, send it to a hardware wallet. And now you have a savings vehicle where you can actually say it's truly Riba free and it's actually halal. And I like to talk bad about fiat a lot, especially on Twitter. But, even I use fiat. Like, I just use fiat today to go buy some stuff. Like, so I think the transition away from a fiat standard to a Bitcoin standard is going to be slow and gradual. It's not going to just be like, oh, let's use Bitcoin. It's already, like, even the Bitcoin network itself isn't ready to handle, like, 2 billion Muslims to get on there, like, right now. But, it will get there. But I think it's important for me to explain to other Muslims that this transition from a fiat standard to a Bitcoin standard is going to take a while.
Oh yeah, it's not going to happen overnight. It's a gradual thing, and I certainly use fiat. Bitcoin is my savings account, but day to day I spend fiat and I save in Bitcoin, and that's kind of the way I approach it. I want to talk about adoption, and I think you follow more closely than I do the adoption, where we are in adoption for different geographical regions, shall we say. Is there a part of the world that you focus on? And because I've got friends in the Middle East, and my response, or my experience of their responses when I bring this topic up, is they're just not interested. A lot of them, if they're from Kuwait, Saudi, Qatar, like, they're very, very wealthy countries, far wealthier per capita than any European countries. And they're like, I don't, whatever, I'm fine, everything works for me. What's your experience with, your network? I'm sure you'll have a variety, if it's anything like me, of people that are kind of drawn to it and then people that reject it. But what's your experience of where we are in adoption? Where are we at in adoption terms? And what's your experience with your kind of Muslim friends, particularly when you bring up this topic? Do they think you're Bitcoin crazy? Do they kind of think you've gone mad? Like, is that an experience you have as well?
So to answer your first question, I have noticed that a lot of, I guess not a lot, but there are some Arab countries that are starting to be more friendly to Bitcoin. But like I mentioned earlier, they're being more friendly in a crypto kind of way. So, I remember seeing this picture last week of it's some person, I guess, working in the financial sector in UAE or something. I don't know if it's like directly tied to the central bank. But there was a picture of him shaking the hand of Brian Armstrong, and the CEO of Coinbase. Yep. So there does seem to be more legislation that makes I guess trading crypto more friendly. So I do see UAE. That's the first thing that comes to mind, where I see like they're starting to open up a little bit. But again, the danger that I see is that they're doing it from a crypto perspective. So it's really important for us to try to like get that signal out there of like why it's Bitcoin only, so that people don't end up buying a shitcoin and end up getting rugged. So I guess I'm not seeing governments themselves being too friendly to crypto, but I am seeing like other pockets of people throughout the not just the Middle East, but I guess also in Africa, where they have to use Bitcoin out of necessity because of their hyperinflating currency. So like one of the things that we did with Bitcoin Mejlis was recently during this past Ramadan, we found there's this orphanage in Uganda, and it's a Muslim based orphanage. And we found out that they accept Bitcoin over the Lightning Network. They use this service called Machankura. where you've probably seen this video where like some person it can receive Bitcoin over the Lightning Network through a text message, like on a dumb phone. Yeah. So that's from that service that I talked about. So they accept donations through the Lightning Network, and we had a mutual friend on Twitter that we were talking to, and he raises funds for them every month to try to get them more supplies and stuff for the orphans. But we thought, let's go ahead and use Bitcoin Medjlis and see if we can get people on Bitcoin Twitter to try to donate over the Lightning Network to this orphanage. Like we're going to try to do it over the month of Ramadan, which during this holy month, it's good for us to try to give more than what we normally give in charity. So we have a blog post on our website about it. But to make a long story short, we were able to raise like $6,000 worth of sats for just during these 30 days, and we have like Bitcoiners all over the world. We had Tahinis also donated. We had like people donate anonymously, and people like posting their all of their Lightning receipts or whatever, showing that they've paid. I think also Alex Gladstein has written extensively about this, where like you have people in third world countries that have to find another way to save their wealth, like because their local fiat currency isn't going to do it. They're not going to have access to gold. But what you notice with a lot of people in these third world countries is that they have smartphones, and the issue is trying to get it connected to the internet. Okay, yeah, that's a pretty big issue. But there are avenues for them to actually attain Bitcoin, and they can start saving in it and also transacting in it because their currency is absolute crap. So again, I just wanted to highlight that, like, overall, I'm seeing governments are still kind of resistant to Bitcoin, and I guess I feel like they're a little bit more friendly to crypto than they are Bitcoin. But I'm also seeing little pockets of different places throughout the Middle East and Africa that are more friendly to Bitcoin because they have to out of necessity. And I guess to answer the second question about locally, whenever I try to talk about Bitcoin to people locally, I've started to take this approach where I don't outright talk about Bitcoin. I like to kind of get the conversation going a little bit. Some person might complain about like, oh, my bill at Costco was like, so this many dollars compared to last year, and they talk about inflation. I'm like, yeah, I'll start talking about the Federal Reserve and interest rates and stuff, and or some person might talk about like, investing in, some guy was showing me his Islamic finance app where he was able to like filter through different stocks or whatever. And, it's like, I try to ask them questions about like, how do you know it's Sharia compliant? It's like, oh, if only there was like some kind of other money that we could save in that didn't have like all of this interest and usury involved in it. That would be really nice. Yeah. And, like I try to get them to think about it before I mention Bitcoin. And then like once we have that discussion talking about fiat, then it's like, oh yeah, you know what? I've been looking into this Bitcoin thing, and then I'll just start like, giving them my sales pitch. So that's kind of been my approach. Yeah. And lately I have been having a little bit of success with that, rather than just like outright, like, wearing a Bitcoin shirt or something, and then like someone asking me about it. I like to just kind of like slowly start talking about fiat, and then I'll mention Bitcoin after that.
Yeah, the conditions today, these days are completely ripe for any kind of discussion about that because, inflation, cost of living, it's hitting everywhere. And you don't even have to really try that hard anymore to get on the topic of Bitcoin because, like, inflation, the fact that like the US debt ceiling, all this stuff. Oh yeah, they'll just raise the debt ceiling. They'll just print another $7 trillion, whatever. No big deal. And then like it just naturally leads towards that way. So yeah, that sounds like you've got a pretty similar experience to me. There's a couple of terms you've used. Riba. Could you just explain that for the audience who aren't familiar with that? Like, what does that mean? Like in in a minute or two.
Yeah. So we're the topic of riba is actually very complicated, and even actually a lot of I've seen Muslim scholars not being able to actually explain. They might be able to explain riba itself, but how it's involved in fiat, they don't really understand that aspect. So riba, in short, is basically just usury or interest. So one thing I like to highlight is that historically the word usury has meant any amount of interest. So now, like, we think of usury and interest as these two different terms, but really, like, historically, usury just meant any amount of interest. But over time, this usury is kind of seen as a bad thing, and interest is kind of like a necessary part of the market or whatever. But the prohibition of interest is a very, very like strict thing to follow in Islam. And it's like it has a severe punishment in the Quran. So like, interest is one of the only sins in the Quran where God talks about, if you want to be involved with interest, then you will have to wage war against me. So like, it's a very like serious thing. And then, there's also sayings by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, saying that it's not just the person that's profiting from interest, but it's also the one that's paying the interest and also the one that witnesses the interest transaction. All of these people are cursed. Like
wow.
is just very blunt. Yeah.
Wow.
And there's even like a really surprising hadith or a saying by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where there will come a day where people will not be able to escape interest. And wherever you are, you will always be affected by its dust, or by the dust of riba, and which is very, very
your article.
very,
I like that. Yeah, I'll put that here.
Yeah, for sure. I can link it to that. I think I may have referenced that hadith in that Bitcoin Magazine article, which I'll also reference. So it's just there's a lot of like very strong language against this sin. And it just feels like we haven't taken the time to understand why this sin is so heinous and so just so awful. But as you start learning about fiat, you kind of understand that like the whole thing operates on interest-bearing loans. What ultimately backs the dollar today, which is the global reserve currency, are just securities like bonds and treasuries and stuff. U.S. Treasuries is what I meant to say. So this thing that what the dollar is backed by is just interest-bearing loans. That's all it is. Like at the end, you have this dollar which was born out of interest, and it's backed by all of these products that are interest-bearing loans, and people keep borrowing and borrowing just to pay. And there's people if there's debt, that means someone is profiting from that debt. So then we have more and more debt, and then now, like I just read some figure that we're paying in the U.S. this almost the same amount of interest that we do on our defense, which is absolutely like insane. Like we're about to reach like the $1 trillion mark on our interest payments, which is absolutely insane. Now, look, I understand that like, someone like if Alice and Bob want to do a Bitcoin interest-based transaction or whatever using Bitcoin, even like that system by itself is like in a closed system. And, that's still haram. I'm not trying to justify that, but as once you start reading about the history of money and how like gold is centralized and how fractional reserve banking was set up and how the Federal Reserve was set up, like the Creature from Jekyll Island is a great book that talks about that. And you kind of, and the Bretton Woods agreements and the getting off the gold standard, you kind of like see how this interest on money plays a really big role in how just how corrupt the whole how the whole system ends up getting corrupt. And I again, this is another topic that my brother and I haven't like fully discussed, and we also plan to provide educational material not just about Bitcoin but also about fiat. This is kind of an angle that I like to talk to Muslims about, is that this riba thing is an absolutely terrible sin. And the only way that we've managed to kind of put a band-aid on the solution is to have Islamic finance. So the current iteration of Islamic finance, or Islamic banking more specifically, is they'll try to get around the fact that in fractional reserve banking there's always interest tied to like giving out loans, right? Like if you want to go take out a loan for a mortgage or buy a car or whatever, there's always interest tied to it. So what a lot of these Islamic banking solutions will do is that they'll go and, they'll layer it with a bunch of transactions to kind of obfuscate the fact that there's interest in it. So one simple example I like to give to non-Muslims is that if you want to buy a house in a Sharia compliant way, you would go to an Islamic bank. So an Islamic bank will look at the house that you want to buy. They'll buy it, say, for $400,000. And then they'll sell it to you for $500,000, and you pay them in installments. And that's their way of one way of Islamic banks getting around riba is that, okay, you're not paying any interest. We're buying the house and we're selling it to you at a markup, and you just pay us in installments.
Yeah.
So you see what's happening here is that the two transactions themselves aren't technically, there is an interest involved, but these transactions are kind of bounded together by a promise that the that the bank is going to, that the buyer is going to buy the house, and that from the Islamic bank that's going to buy it. So
it's a workaround, like it's a loophole, isn't it? It's a workaround. I mean, I've heard about that. You know, like you take out, you know, you need a $10,000 loan. Well, you don't pay interest, but there's a $1,000 fee, right? A fee, because a fee's maybe less, you know, controversial than an interest. So there's ways they get around it. And I think that, you know, like you say, completely just to echo the debt-based system, the debt ring, we've got to the point where it's all funny money now, and it is all debt. And the sad thing is that in the system that we currently live under, the financial system, the fiat debt-based system, you're I was going to say almost incentivized, but you are incentivized to take out debt. Every company, every big company has billions of dollars of debt. Why? Because you have to compete. You borrow money at, you know, historically 1%, 2%, 3% interest, and then you take like the fake dying money or the deteriorating money, and then you take that weak money and then you buy real assets with it, you buy hard assets with it, and you're borrowing the bad money and buying the good money, and you're kind of like making that spread, and you're incentivized to do that, which encourages irresponsible, risky behavior, and every now and again it all comes crashing down. You and I know that Bitcoin is a bearer asset, but could you just describe for people who aren't familiar with that term what a bearer asset is? I've got a quote from Lynn Alden here. She posted last year, the difference between assets that are someone else's liability and assets that are nobody's liability probably got a lot clearer to people in recent weeks. Mm-hmm. And could you just talk about what a bearer asset is?
Yeah, so I think, you know, the big difference between like Bitcoin and fiat is, especially in terms of thinking about it as a bearer asset, is that, you know, for the dollar, you don't actually own anything. Like whenever, you know, people deposit, you know, a lot of Muslims will think that the money they have in their checking account is like totally halal and it's riba free. But we all know, like we know how the fractional reserve banking works, is that anytime you deposit money into a checking or savings account or whatever, that money isn't yours. They're basically that is basically a security, and they take those funds, and those funds are loaned out. And if you're not making interest on that money, you're enabling the bank to make interest on that money. And you know, again, that's not. If you read the fine print of any bank account that you open or whatever, like you don't actually own that money. It's the bank that owns it. And the big difference about Bitcoin is that you actually own it. Like if you have your private keys or your 12 words in your head, no one can take that away from you. Like you have that, and it's secure, and you know, it's really neat in that you don't have to trust a third party to manage that for you. You can manage that yourself. And you know, I highly encourage Muslims to kind of think about Bitcoin in terms of its like in terms of, I guess, mathematics, in that, you know, Bitcoin is just information at the end of the day. Like you can, if it's hard to own regular information, right? Like I can't own, it's hard for me to like own something like a poem, because if I read the poem, someone else could like, you know, transcribe it and read it or whatever. But what's neat about Bitcoin is that people can't copy your Bitcoin. They can't copy and paste it. You actually own that. And at the end of the day, it's just information that's encrypted that you own. And I think that's really powerful. And it's something I try to get Muslims to understand.
Yeah, no one owes you that Bitcoin. It's not like you have, I mean, assuming we're self-custodying it, right? It's not an account of someone owes you, you know, 0.1 Bitcoin. It's like, no, it's like nobody owes you that. You actually have it. It's like the best way to imagine it is like physical gold. If you hold physical bullion, if I'm holding a gold coin in my hand, that's not debt. That is just money. And taking self-custody of your Bitcoin is the same in, you know, just in the digital form of taking self-custody of your Bitcoin. It's no one else's debt. Once that Bitcoin has reached your wallet, you have possession of it, and the whole financial world could collapse around you, but your Bitcoin is still your Bitcoin. Right? It's like, exactly. You don't then need to pay it back. You can't default on your bit, because like, it's not debt. If you've got a mortgage, you know, your bank account can not pay you back the money that's in your bank. But if you've got Bitcoin, it's a bearer asset, it's yours, and it's the safest thing that you could possibly hold to store your wealth alongside, the precious metals, but in a digital format for the 21st, century.
Right. And, I've also written this in that Bitcoin Magazine article about, because Bitcoin is a bearer asset that that anybody can own, and that it's not like, there's not someone that's like managing it. There's no FDIC or whatever that like can like bail you out. In that, I think I like to think of Bitcoin as being anti-Riba, or like anti-usury or anti-interest, because like, there's a hard cap of 21 million. The only way to get more Bitcoin is you actually have to do proof of work. You can't loan out Bitcoin to get more Bitcoin like you do with fiat. So I like to think of Bitcoin as having like this anti-Riba monetary property that I like to talk about with other Muslims, in that, if we ever like, inshallah, get to like a Bitcoin standard, I think you're going to see a lot of people that are not going to want to lend out their Bitcoin just to earn some measly amount of interest, because if the Bitcoin is gone, there's no FDIC to insure it for you. There's a 21 million hard cap. It's it. It's gone. So I think what's going to happen is that, people, instead of rather getting revenue through interest, are going to actually invest their money into actual businesses. Like they're going to be doing more equity financing rather than debt financing. And coincidentally, this is exactly what Islamic banking and Islamic finance try to do. And I think it was Alan Farrington that said that Bitcoin is just what Islamic finance would be on a hard money. So it's really kind of poetic how like that really works out. And this is the kind of the actual Islamic case for Bitcoin, is that Bitcoin at the end of the day destroys usury. And that, yes, Alice and Bob can do an interest-based transaction on Bitcoin. I'm not saying they can't, but like when you usury cannot scale with Bitcoin. It just can't, because it's an actual hard money, and it's actually something that you own.
Who try that, right? It will inevitably punish those, and those who try it and take that risk, and maybe go to the the more unethical methods of using what is just a neutral kind of pure monetary system. You can use it maybe unethically by doing the whole gambling and interest thing. Yeah. But eventually, as Caitlin Long points out, it will punish you. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah. And I mean, we even see that with all of these crypto exchanges going down, right? Like, why did people leave their crypto on BlockFi and all of these other platforms? It's because they just wanted to just earn a little bit of interest on it. And what happened? They ended up getting wrecked. And this is what happens even without like hyper Bitcoinization or whatever. Like, imagine on an actual true Bitcoin standard, people are going to be a lot more discerning in who they give their Bitcoin to. Oh, you're actually going to have to trust the person before you give them their Bitcoin before you loan it out. Yeah, that's a crazy idea. That's actually how money should work.
Yeah. It's such a different system, though, isn't it, to what we are used to and what we've grown up with. The mindset shift will take a long time. It's not going to happen overnight. It's be a gradual transition. And one of my favorite things to do, actually, is like if I have some time to daydream, I just kind of pontificate and try and conjure up like what the world might look like on a hard money Bitcoin standard. Because like it's impossible to know, and it's very difficult to even imagine, because nothing like Bitcoin has ever existed. Scientists and technologists and philosophers have been talking about this. I just saw a video from Buckminster Phillips, a famous scientist in the 60s, I think, right, today, about how he was saying about how, by the year 2000, there'll be this energy money. He talks about this energy money which will exist in the digital realm, and it won't be gold. The gold is pirates' money. He says that won't be a thing. It will be energy money, and it will flow freely between countries. It's like, this isn't just something that popped up in 2008 and 2009 and is now like, a bit of a fad. Like this Bitcoin thing, which could have been called anything, but it happens to be called Bitcoin. This, hard, digital, scarce monetary asset, which fulfills all the qualities that a good money should have. This has been talked about for years and years and decades. And one of my fun things to do, how sad is that, is to like think about what changes will be societal and, you know, cultural and, well, maybe even religious as well? Will there be like become kind of people who have really, really, you know, feel very strongly the way? Will it kind of, how will it affect the world we live in, the societal norms, etc.? So I guess, you know, coming towards the end now, leads us nicely on to what is your kind of vision? What is your, I guess, outlook? You know, you can talk about what you hope or what you think is realistic, but like for the next kind of 5-10 years, how do you think Bitcoin will continue to kind of play out in terms of adoption and how it will affect, you know, macroeconomics and just the way of life of most people?
Yeah, man, this is definitely something I also like to think about. It is really hard to imagine, like you said, there's nothing that's been like Bitcoin before. I don't want to say unfortunate, but the pesky thing about Bitcoin is it makes you think about money. You know, and you know, because I love the way like Saifedean talks about the history of money and the Bitcoin standard, because you kind of get the sense that humanity like has kind of instinctively knew that we needed this technology of money. So like we've just like, all right, let's use beads, let's use these rhinestones, let's use this, and then they kind of, oh, what's this shiny thing? Like this thing looks like it could be a perfect money. And, you know, it's just when you read about the history of money, you find that like humanity is on a quest to try to find the most perfect form of money. And it just feels like with the discovery of Bitcoin, it's just kind of a natural step, in that progression of trying to find that perfect money. Like I guess on a Bitcoin standard, I think, you know, like I've said before, I think, you know, it's going to cause people to be more forward thinking. I think it's, you know, obviously people's time preference will lower. People aren't going to be, you know, as spendy. They're not going to just spend it on stupid crap. I think they're going to be more forward thinking. They're going to be more long-term thinking. And with that, I think it just completely changes the way like civilizations will function, because if you're more long-term thinking, you're more likely to do things like have a family. You're more likely to pursue things that will give you joy. You're more likely to build things that are going to last for a very long time because you're lower time preference. And I guess, you know, I also see, you know, inshallah, as more Muslims adopt Bitcoin, I feel like Bitcoin is going to be one of the key things that hopefully in the future will get Muslims out of the situation that we find ourselves in, where right now, like a majority of Muslim countries just aren't, you know, very prosperous. I mean, there are some, and, you know, but I do think kind of Bitcoin unlocks that. Bitcoin will unleash ethical money, and people are more incentivized to act in an ethical way, which to me perfectly aligns with Islam and what we advocate for, and and how we try to live our life. And I just see Bitcoin as being one of the key parts in trying to get humanity out of this debt-based slavery that we find ourselves in. And a big part of that is education. So like, I really appreciate the stuff that you do on your YouTube videos, and all the other Bitcoiners that try to like compile all of this information and try to explore new facets of this Bitcoin thing. Because we don't quite, even now in 2023, we don't quite understand it. And I still feel like there's a lot more topics to explore that's related to Bitcoin. And I'm very hopeful for the future. I like to talk very negatively, especially on Twitter, but at the end of the day, I'm extremely hopeful, and I have a vision for a more prosperous future for my children and their children as well.
Nice. I mean, you said that so well. Something that you do notice in the Bitcoin community, it's a bit of a kind of cliche term, but is the optimism, right? Like Bitcoiners that I've met at conferences and online, like they're actually beneath the I guess the realization of how this debt fiat Ponzi is maybe going to collapse. Like, but beyond that, there is just optimism, like, and what Bitcoin will usher in, I think no one knows what it'll look like, but I'm very optimistic and very, very hopeful about that as well.
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
Like the more we can spread education and just start these discussions, the better, because actually we don't want hyper-Bitcoinization. We want a slow transition, because if it happens too quickly, there'll be too many people that get left behind. The best thing for Bitcoin and the best thing for the world is that it continues to be gradually, slowly but surely adopted, little by little, right? Human emotions will cause cycles. The halving, arguable whether that really has any impact, but actually slow and steady adoption is the best thing, so that more and more people can start to use it. We build up the Bitcoin economy, the layers on top of that, and then, yeah, it's looking bright, as I like to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also get the same feeling. I went to my first Bitcoin conference last year, and just the optimism is just oozing out of these people. It's really insane. I've never quite experienced people like that. Bitcoiners are made out of different stuff. And yeah, like I said, I'm very optimistic about the future.
Yeah, no, amazing. Well, no, I really appreciate you coming to my channel. Like I say, my audience is made up of a large amount of Muslims from all over the world, all over the Middle East, but also in developed countries as well. And I hope that this conversation, hearing, you and me talk passionately about Bitcoin, might give them a little bit of curiosity, right? To like dig a bit deeper, learn a little bit more. And I've got your links here. I've got your YouTube channel and your Medium post and your Twitter. Is there anything else that you'd like to point people towards, any direction you'd like to send people who are watching this?
I'd also like to send them to, we have a Bitcoin Majlis Twitter account, and also bitcoinmajlis.org. It's Bitcoin, MAJLIS.org. I will also link that as well. So, just for you and any person listening, if you know any Muslims that are curious about Bitcoin and want to learn, just send them our way. Just point them to Bitcoin Majlis. There's the email that we have there. And there's also, they can DM us on Twitter. We'll be more than happy to kind of give them material and get them started on their Bitcoin journey. So please send any Muslims send them our way.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, Abdullah. And thanks for taking the time.